In this lesson, I'll present some ideas for drafting and enforcing Netiquette policies in your classroom. I'll start by analyzing the need for Netiquette guidelines, and then talk about ways to make these policies relevant to your students. And then we'll talk about how to enforce these policies. The first thing I would like to emphasize about Netiquette is that far too many teachers respond to bad Netiquette by just foregoing online collaborative activities altogether. And that is definitely the wrong response. Teachers see that their students are engaging in off-topic discussion, using confusing text speak, and producing low-quality work, and their response is not to do these activities anymore. I have two responses to this. First, how clear were your expectations going into this activity? Did you model for them what on-topic participation looks like? Did you give them clear guidance for spelling and grammar? Was there a rubric to let them know what high-quality work was? Remember, most students are very familiar with online environments, but they're used to using them for leisure and for socialization. It's our essential role as teachers to show them the differences between academic and professional online environments and those they use for fun. It's our job to teach students how Blackboard is different from Xbox Live. The second thought I had is you need to keep it all in perspective. Sometimes we get off topic during class discussion. Does that mean you never do class discussion again? No, we need to teach students how to stay on topic and hold high expectations for that. And it's the same thing with online collaborative activities. Teaching Netiquette ought to be like the way we teach other standards of behavior, which is to say, if we give students a long list of rules written in legalese, they're unlikely to remember them and they're even less likely to follow them. However, if we have a short list of clear rules, students are far more likely to remember them and far more likely to follow them. And if we involve students in the drafting of these policies, there will be a much stronger sense of ownership as well. So, how can you make the drafting of Netiquette policies a classroom activity, and why would you? Well, the reason you would is because then, instead of commanding your students to follow rules, you're asking them to draft rules, which, as I said before, gives them a sense of ownership, but more importantly, leads them to think more deeply about what online interaction should be like, which will help them as they go on, not only in academic contexts, but they'll understand how to behave appropriately in professional networks, and hopefully it will also extend to the way they treat others in social networks. So here are some ideas for ways to make drafting Netiquette policies a class activity. You might use all of these or you might mix and match. First, you might ask students to consider their own online experiences if they're old enough to have many. What annoys them in interactions with others? What makes them feel good? Then, ask students to look at existing classroom rules and general expectations for polite behavior. How do these rules apply to online interactions? If you have a short list of clear general rules, this will go really well. If your rules are overly specific, then it may not go as well. Then present students with hypothetical situations and ask them how they'd like to see those situations resolved. So a little bit of role play will help students to understand why there needs to be rules for Netiquette. Ask students to categorize these expectations into broader categories. For example, not using caps locks to shout at people and no insults might both go together in a general category or rule of be respectful. So once you have these categories, collaboratively draft general rules, with or without specific examples. Now the best thing to do is to tie them into existing class and school policies. Keep in mind, the fewer rules there are, the easier they are to remember, and the easier it is for you to apply them. Once the rules have been drafted by the students, post the rules in visible places, in the LMS near collaboration activities, on the classroom rules, in your newsletter if you have one, and then have the students sign the expectations. As you're working with students, obviously you want to give them some free rein to make their own rules, but you might also want to help guide them to different issues to make sure they're thorough. You may want to revisit these guidelines as you students use new platforms. For example, you might draft a set of rules in preparation for a blog or a discussion board, but then later in the class, when students are writing emails to community members, you may find that it's important to talk about the way your Netiquette policies apply to the different format of email or web conferencing or wikis or whatever you're using. One thing that's important about Netiquette is covering email Netiquette with students. Many teachers assume that students use email and are familiar with it, but email is largely an academic and a professional tool. Most students conduct their communication through text messages and through Facebook messages, which have very different Netiquette rules. And so helping them to understand email, which they will inevitably have to use in academic and professional life, is a very important part of socializing them to the 21st century.